fighter. I'm here for the war fighters. This is personal, passionate for me.
There have been some serious allegations made with respect to the nominee.
The Constitution protects trans people just like it protects everyone else.
The American people want us to work together, and that requires Republicans tuning out the most extreme voices.
A busy time in Washington. Hello, I'm Robert Costa. Welcome to America Decides. President-elect Donald Trump's his choice for Defense Secretary, former Fox News anchor Pete Hegseth, is on Capitol Hill again today trying to wrangle support. But could another Trump cabinet pick be on the verge of withdrawing their name?
I spoke to the president-elect this morning. He said, keep going, keep fighting. Behind you all the way.
So you're in this all the way.
Why would I back down?
As Hegseth vows to fight on, CBS News now learns there's already a potential new contender for the job. Florida governor and one-time Trump rival Ron DeSantis. He's being mentioned by some Trump allies. Also happening in Washington, the Supreme Court hears landmark arguments on a case regarding transgender care for minors. The justices, for the first time, stepping into the debate on whether states can restrict access to gender-affirming care. We'll get to that story in a moment, but first, we're following a major news story beyond politics tonight, an unfortunate one. The CEO of America's largest healthcare insurer gunned down this morning in New York City. Right now, police searching for a suspect in what they are calling a brazen targeted attack. That was on United Healthcare executive Brian Thompson. Ann Schechter with our CBS News Crime and Public Safety Unit has been following this tragic story all day. She joins us now. What else can you tell us about this shooting?
Well, the brazen way that the suspect carried out the shooting is really alarming. We have reviewed the surveillance footage that the NYPD was relying on in those early hours of the investigation that showed a cold, calculating, pre-planned attack where the suspect went to Starbucks a few minutes before the shooting and about 5 minutes later walked behind a vehicle. So he was sort of hidden, and he was waiting for the victim to walk from his hotel, the Marriott, down the street to the Hilton on that West 54th Street here in Midtown Manhattan. He then emerged from behind the vehicle just as soon as Thompson walked by him and shot him in the back of his calf, and then again, once he was down, shot him again. It was measured. It was calculated. He did not run away. He carefully and slowly crossed the street. And then what we learned from other surveillance footage is he was able to get on a city bike and ride his bike north into Central Park. And that's where the trail goes dark. There's no surveillance video of him once he enters the park. And this might raise questions for law enforcement in the future about how secure and how much surveillance they want to keep in Central Park, which clearly has less than in Midtown Manhattan, where we see a lot of images of him. So the calculating way that he carried this out, it's clear that this was a hitman, probably for hire.
So what are you hearing, if anything, from your law enforcement sources about this manhunt, where they are looking beyond Central Park, maybe within Central Park? What's the next step?
Well, they cased Central Park all day today, adding resources, but also on the Upper East and the Upper West side as well, looking at all the city bike stations. They are checking all of those. He was wearing gloves at the time of the shooting. They are still fingerprinting everything just in case they can get something. They were able to get some DNA from that Starbucks, but it appears to be not enough to ID a suspect. We do not have an ID at this time, and he is still at large. I thought it was telling that they moved up. They moved earlier a press conference with the new NYPD commissioner in order to ask the public to please give in tips. The fact that we are many hours now after that 6:45 a.m. initial phone call to the police tells you just how complex this has become. Every hour it becomes more complex because there are so many different routes that he could have taken to depart New York City.
Anna Schechter, thank you. Tough story. Now with our CBS News congressional correspondent, Nicole Killian. and Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes in West Palm Beach, Florida. Great to be with both of you. Nicole, we saw you speaking with Pete Hegseth on Capitol Hill. He seemed to be relatively calm as he paced through the halls of Congress, talking with CBS News. And what was your takeaway up close of Hegseth?
Well, to your point, I mean, he has tried to take this process in stride. You know, we have talked to him just about every day this week since he has been up here, as there have been this drip, drip, drip of allegations ranging from financial impropriety to sexual misconduct to drinking on the job, all of which we have asked him about. Some questions he has answered, others he did not. But as you heard from that exchange we had with him this morning, at this point, he is not backing down and does not appear this time to have any intentions of withdrawing his name from consideration, despite our reporting that the president-elect may be considering Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for this role. As you heard Hegseth tell me that he spoke directly with President-elect Trump this morning and said that the president-elect encouraged him to continue to keep going, that he is behind him all the way. That is something he reiterated to reporters throughout the day here. Just a short time ago, he had a pretty critical meeting with Joni Ernst, who hasn't committed to supporting Hegseth just yet and has expressed concern about some of these allegations. You know, she did say that this was a pretty candid discussion that they had. Hegseth also told me that it was very engaging. But certainly she will be a critical vote going forward, and someone who has also potentially been floated as a defense secretary designate potentially. However, she did tell me when I asked her if she was being considered for the job, she said Pete Hegseth is a nominee for now.
Let's listen to Senator Ernst. We have a clip of her.
Senator, will you support Mr. Hegseth's nomination?
It was a frank and thorough conversation.
That goes to Nicole's point, frank and thorough. She doesn't seem to be angling for the job. Let's hear what Hegseth had to say himself in a gaggle.
We're putting the warfighters first. That's what Donald Trump asked me to do. Your job is to bring a warfighting ethos back to the Pentagon. Your job is to make sure that it's lethality, lethality, lethality. Everything else is gone. Everything else that distracts from that shouldn't be happening. That's the message I'm hearing from senators in that advise and consent process. And it's been a wonderful process.
It's been a rocky process as well for Mr. Hegseth. So you see a message of defiance in his conversations with Nicole Killian. You see it he was on the Megyn Kelly program saying he's not going to withdraw. And you have everybody, Nancy Cordes, watching this at Mar-a-Lago, including President-elect Trump. And there is this talk of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. So how is the Trump orbit weighing Hegseth's performance on Capitol Hill with the reality that they might go in a different direction if that reporting bears out?
Well, I'll tell you, Robert, I've been talking to sources today, and sources close to Ron DeSantis say that he is indeed interested in this job and would likely accept if it were to be offered to him. Trump advisors themselves are staying quiet. They have not acknowledged publicly that Hegseth's nomination is in any trouble. But clearly, the fact that replacements are being floated at all, including DeSantis, including Joni Ernst, including Congressman Wesley Hunt, is a sign that they are already looking forward. And the possibility that someone like Ron DeSantis, someone who's a current governor, so he's got executive experience, he has military experience as well, having served as a JAG officer with the Navy SEALs, it was described to me that this position is a perfect fit for his experience, and he's certainly someone who has been vetted and would be highly unlikely to run into some of the same troubles that Hegseth has been running into as he meets with Republican senators.
What's your sense, though, Nancy, about where this all goes in the coming days?
Well, I think, CBS News has already reported that at least 4 Republican senators would be no votes on Hegseth if the vote were to be held today. Now, it's not being held today. It's probably not going to be held for another month. But things don't seem to be going in the right direction for Hegseth. And so the question is, how long will the president-elect allow this kind of uncertainty to go on? And might it be easier for him now that DeSantis, for example, who wasn't that interested initially in joining the administration, he felt like he had a great day job here in Florida, if someone of DeSantis's name recognition, experience, caliber is interested in taking this job and would not present some of the headaches that Hegseth has been presenting to Trump, then it might be worth it for him to change course.
Nicole, back to you. When you're on Capitol Hill, you're hearing from lawmakers, as you've reported, about Hegseth's alleged conduct. And Hegseth has spoken out, as I mentioned, on the Megyn Kelly show about what he's being accused of in terms of past alleged sexual misconduct, past alleged just misconduct generally. Let's listen to what he had to say.
It is an arsenal of lies. They mobilize to destroy. I've had senators look me in the eye, friends, great, said they're trying to kill you. And when I wake up, I look at my wife, we talk about it, we say, if Donald Trump can do this, if he can fight the way that he's fought with everything they've done to them, then we better learn to be able to fight ourselves.
So, Nicole Killian, I'll ask you the same question I just asked Nancy. What's next? I mean, where does the reporting truth exist amid all of the talking points and the defiance?
Well, as of now, we are expecting Pete Hegseth to continue to be a constant presence here on Capitol Hill. He is expected to have more meetings this week, potentially the following week as well. So to his point, he is not backing down. He is not going anywhere. And those who are kind of shepherding him around Capitol Hill this week reaffirmed that. But that being said, you know, to Nancy's point, this is going to come down to math and the numbers. I think that's part of why you're seeing Pete Hegseth out there doing this full court press, you know, doing interviews with Megyn Kelly, talking to us here on Capitol Hill, not only meeting with Senate Republicans today, but House Republicans, even though technically they don't have a say in this confirmation process, at least for now. And of course, his mother taking to the airwaves earlier today as well in support of her son, despite sending a very scathing email that was published by the New York Times, calling him an abuser of women, although she walked that back, saying she kind of did that more in the heat of the moment. So that being said, you know, I think Hegseth will continue to forge ahead. There are a number of senators who have expressed reservations about these allegations and some who remain non-committal at this time. And so, you know, the more Hegseth continues to stay on the Hill, it's really a question of will he be able to sway more of these senators who may be on the fence to his side.
And very quickly, Nicole, was that Norm Coleman, the former Minnesota senator I saw walking behind Hegseth? What's he doing up there?
He is one of those who is acting as a Sherpa, if you will, for Pete Hegseth. He has been with him over the last couple of days. And of course, they have a Minnesota connection. So he told me that is why he is here in support of Hegseth, helping him out at this time.
I've always thought that was a funny word, Sherpa. It's like something out of a Hemingway novel or something. Nicole Killian and Nancy Cordes, one in Washington, one in Palm Beach, both great. Thank you so much.
We will get critical race theory and transgender insanity the hell out of our schools.
President-elect Donald Trump has looked at the treatment of transgender minors as an issue that he would focus on at times during the 2024 campaign. Now the Supreme Court considering a ban on gender-affirming care when it comes to that front of that issue. Coming up next, we'll take a closer look at the Tennessee law that could have far-reaching implications. There's a landmark case now before the Supreme Court. The justice is being asked to consider this ban on gender-affirming care for minors. In March of 2023, in Tennessee, the Republican-led legislature there passed a law banning the use of puberty blockers and hormone therapy in those under the age of 18. That outcome could have major implications nationwide as other states consider similar measures. Let's bring in our Catherine Cole, who covers the Supreme Court for CBS News. Great to have you here. Thanks for being on America Decides. So Tell us more about the arguments that are being made.
Yeah, so this case is about a law passed in Tennessee that would ban the use of puberty blockers, other medications for transgender children. The Biden administration argued today that a lower court ruling that said that that law was okay needs to go away. Their argument is that this is life-saving care for those children. On the other side, Tennessee argued that we don't need to constitutionalize transgender medication for children, that this simply isn't in the federal constitution, and that it's up to the states to decide what should be allowed for the children in each state.
What could we learn, if anything, from how the justices have been dealing with the arguments made in the court?
I mean, we learned a lot. Passions were running high this morning at the court. Argument went over 2.5 hours, and by the end, it was clear that there was a majority of the court ready to uphold this law. So on the conservative side, 5 of the 6 justices were very vocal, saying this seems like something that should be left to the legislative process, something for the states to determine. And a number of them even invoked measures in European countries, the UK, Scandinavia, rolling back some of these medications in children and youth populations. That said, on the other side, the 3 Democrat-appointed justices were also pretty vocal as well, with Justice Jackson even comparing this law to Jim Crow-era laws, and Justice Sotomayor saying that children need this medication.
So what does this mean in terms of how other states might handle the issue of gender-affirming care for minors?
So right now, about 26 states have laws like Tennessee's, and then on the flip side, 14 states have laws protecting the provision of this kind of treatment. If the things look the way they look this morning and this law is upheld, that means that each state can continue with a state-by-state approach. So you might get something that looks kind of like the abortion framework, where people who want this certain type of care are going to relocate to states that allow it, and people who are comfortable without that care might stay in states that don't.
Let's listen to Justice Kavanaugh.
The Constitution doesn't take sides. If there's strong, forceful, scientific policy arguments on both sides in a situation like this, why isn't it best to leave it to the democratic process?
So you heard from Justice Kavanaugh. Why isn't it best to just leave it to the democratic process? Is the big picture here that this Supreme Court, with a conservative majority, is often leaning towards states having much more of a say over policy, especially state legislatures?
I think you've put your finger on it exactly. I think this really echoes the landmark decision from 2 years ago overturning Roe v. Wade, where the court is saying we are not going to overstep our place as judges. We're going to let legislatures legislate.
Catherine Cole, thank you for your insights and your reporting. We appreciate it. Even as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth works those halls of Capitol Hill, President-elect Trump might be thinking about his options based on CBS News' reporting, though nothing's set in stone yet. We'll get more on all of this coming up next. You're streaming America Decides. In recent years, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, he has flipped between being a close ally to being a rival of President-elect Trump when they ran against each other for the Republican nomination in 2024. But based on CBS News' latest reporting, he might have a shot now of being the nominee for Secretary of Defense. There is consideration about him joining the mix should Pete Hegseth, the current pick for that position, somehow decide to leave consideration. Joining us now is CBS News political director Finn Gomez and CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Great to be with both of you. Let's begin by listening to Senator Blumenthal, a Democrat of Connecticut, about the state of the Hegseth nomination.
My view is that Pete Hegseth is doomed. I think it's over for him. And I think what we're seeing now is a drip by drip, day by day disclosures that he failed to make to the Trump team, and they ought to be damn angry about it.
So at least one Senate Democrat thinks the Hegseth nomination is doomed. Well, based on your reporting, Finn, we'll go with you then. Ed, jump in. What's the truth? What's the reporting say?
I think it looks very problematic for Pete Hegseth at this point.
Why?
Look, we saw some Republican senators, I know Ed's done some reporting on this, that show that it could be some opposition from Republican senators that show that it could be, there's a path with a lot of high obstacles for Pete Hegseth at this point. And I do believe that, and we have some reporting that the Ron DeSantis as a possible replacement, the governor of Florida as a possible replacement for Hegseth, is, I've been told, very real by a source close to the transition and confirmable. There has been, as you mentioned earlier, there's been some bad blood, of course, between DeSantis and Donald Trump. But I think some top people in Trump's world believe that, that if it goes that way, that DeSantis could be, he's very confirmable and someone who can, he doesn't have to spend a lot of political capital on.
So how does this work? I mean, if Hegseth is still the pick, but do we know if DeSantis has spoken with President-elect Trump?
We know they were together yesterday at an event in West Palm Beach for the memorial service for 3 police officers who died in an accident last month. It was in the wake of that this suddenly emerged, and that there were conversations last night about possibly considering him again. He'd been on the list before. He had been considered for either that role or something else. And so, with Trump and everyone else down there in Florida seeing Hegseth twisting in the wind, they, in essence, have begun the conversations about, well, who could conceivably replace him if it's not going to work out. This is not unlike what happened with Matt Gaetz, right? He was sent out there for a week. It was signaled that there were problems. They started looking at potential replacements. Gaetz dropped. Pam Bondi was named.
Seems to be digging in a bit.
He's doing it differently. Yes, he today at least is far more defiant. But I've gotten some indications this afternoon that Megyn Kelly interview didn't help him. If you really listen and watch or read the transcript of that conversation, he's talking again in ways that irk some senators who are already on the fence. And it's telling that this afternoon he has come out of at least 1 or 2 of these meetings with Republican senators and said, I'll stop drinking if I get the job. So he's acknowledging that there's a problem with his behavior already and that he's willing to change his behavior in order to get the job. That's not normally what a nominee has to do in order to win a senator's vote. And it suggests that there's a real problem in getting to the 50-51 that they would need in a 53-47 Senate.
Yeah.
Finn, when you step back and you look at Hegseth, but you also really look at Matt Gaetz, the first nominee for Attorney General, Senator Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, Matt Gaetz was from Florida, Pam Bondi, the new Attorney General nominee from Florida, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Susie Wiles, the Floridian for Chief of Staff. What's going on inside of Trump's inner circle? So much Florida energy, so many Floridians being considered or mulled for these top positions.
Well, a lot of it has to do, I believe, with the fact, well, it's his home state now, obviously, but it's also, Susie Wiles, who's the chief of staff, a very powerful, influential chief of staff, as we know. And I did want to say this, that on DeSantis, again, she was fired by Ron DeSantis when she was an operative for him. Later, she became, she ran Trump's operation in Florida, right? And DeSantis tried to fire her then. There's been a lot of bad blood between those two, Bob. I just want to say this real quick. I did talk to a source close to the transition who says that Susie Wiles has come around. That she realizes how much political capital it will take to confirm Hegseth and understands that it may be in the best interest of the president-elect to select another candidate. And she puts the interest of the president-elect over her own history with DeSantis. A DeSantis confirmation would require less political capital than a Hegseth confirmation. I spoke to another prominent Republican, Florida Republican, who knows and talks to DeSantis, who said that he believes that if DeSantis was asked to be Secretary of Defense, it's hard to imagine that he would say no. So, look, I think that is a very real option. I think there's a lot of strength there in Florida. And again, I mean, from Pam Bondi to DeSantis to Rick Scott, there's a lot of strength, Floridian strength in the corner for Donald Trump.
But just to button down what you said, you have someone close to Susie telling you that she gets it now.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, in fact,
so
look, he's confirmable.
The
right?
nails, the nails are like, there's the coffin and they're getting close.
They're considering others too, Bob. They are, obviously. But I mean, look.
We've reported today Senator Joni Ernst is among those, and she had her meeting with him this afternoon. Yeah.
Sure.
But they get that this is a real problem now.
Yeah.
A lot can happen. It's a fluid situation. Finn Gomez at O'Keefe, we appreciate you coming by. Meanwhile, Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney delivered his farewell remarks on the Senate floor today. In the 12 years, over a past decade, he's gone from being the party's nominee in 2012 to what some call a Republican who's at odds with his own party. First elected to the Senate in 2018, he voted to convict Trump during both impeachment trials in the Senate. Senator Romney announced last year he would not seek re-election He talked about his success and failures and thanked a group of moderate senators, including Kirsten Sinema, Susan Collins, Joe Manchin, and John Tester. And he referenced what he called the scourge of partisan politics.
There are some today who would tear at our unity, who would replace love with hate, who deride our foundation of virtue, or who debase the values upon which the blessings of heaven depend. Now, I've been in public service for 25 years. I have learned that politics alone cannot measure up to the challenges we face.
It's a big farewell. I'm sitting here with Ed O'Keefe and Finn Gomez. We spent a lot of time in our lives, in our reporting lives, covering Romney's 2008 run, his 2012 run, and his return to politics as a senator. Next, we'll look at Peter Navarro and his role in the upcoming Trump White House less than 5 months after his release from prison. Recall the Rex Tillersons, John Boltons, General Mark Milley's of President-elect Trump's first administration were critical at times in the days after January 6th in particular. But now it's about Trump loyalists inside the transition. CBS News has been reporting how loyalty matters. And today, one of those loyalists got a promotion of sorts, a return. Trump announced that Peter Navarro will return to the White House next year as his senior counselor for trade and manufacturing. Navarro, who did serve in the first administration as a trade advisor, was in prison for several months this year for defying a subpoena from the House Select Committee investigating January 6th. Let's bring in our political panel. Tom LoBianco, he is the co-founder and national political reporter for 24 Site News, and Sabrina Rodriguez, national political reporter at the Washington Post. Great to have both of you here. Sabrina, let's begin with you. Navarro, not a surprise coming in, but what does it signal about this incoming administration?
I mean, it signals that we're going to be seeing a repeat of Trump's trade policies. You know, Peter Navarro is someone who has been with him since the beginning. He served as an advisor to Trump in his 2016 presidential campaign. He was with him through his entire first term. And they share a lot of the same views when it comes to trade policy. So it really points us to expect Donald Trump to try and deliver on his promises of tariffs. You know, this is someone who shares his protectionist views, who is down to, you know, launch tariff threats at countries around the world. And that really is what Trump has promised, and that is where Peter Navarro really stands on these issues. So it's someone who's in alignment with him on that trade front.
And Tom, it brings up the question, who's running economic policy in the next Trump administration? Is it the Treasury Secretary, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, if he gets confirmed? Is it some economic advisor in the White House, or is it Peter Navarro, who always is vocal inside these internal deliberations? What does your reporting tell you?
I mean, very classic Trump world dynamic, you know, Lutnick versus Bessent. Navarro being of that Bannon, Don Jr. wing of things. You know, you think back to these classic governing studies out of Harvard, you know, how you set up an operation. And Trump's only ever been one operation. It's whoever's in his ear, whoever's got the cell phone, how many can Susie Wiles, as chief of staff, block and tackle. But you know, Sabrina noted there, it really is, there is some unity on key items here, you know, especially with trade, potentially tariffs. Tariffs could be a little weird, all right? And you got to see where the donors come down on that. I remember, you know, shortly after the election, I was talking with some of my Trump folks about this. You know, where are the mega donors on this thing? But it's actually fairly, as Trump world goes, it's actually fairly unified.
Let's turn now to that possibility of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis being brought into the mix. You do wonder, could Senate Democrats, how would they look at it? We saw Senator Blumenthal earlier on the show said he thinks the Hegseth nomination's dead. So if it actually does die at some point, Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, who's been unique to say the least in terms of his voice on Capitol Hill, he weighed in on this possibility today.
I'd consider voting yes for him if he's possible, but I think he has to finally admit that he wears lifts in the boots throughout his whole campaign. Was it 3 inches? Was it 4 inches? I think he really should just come clear on that, and I could consider that. But I would think that he's a better choice than our current choice.
As someone who grew up in Pennsylvania, we see classic Western Pennsylvania personality and humor from Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania there. Sabrina, though, when it comes down to the reality of the defense secretary position, do you believe that DeSantis could actually get a bit of a bipartisan coalition if he ever became the nominee?
I think the reality is to find anything these days that's going to get a bipartisan vote is going to be very tough. I think Fetterman remains a unique figure in the Senate at this point. But will it be easier to get those 53 Republican votes? Certainly. I mean, seeing the conversation that's happening on Capitol Hill today and this week around Pete Hegseth just shows the uphill battle that he has. And the fact that we are even having a conversation about Trump, considering DeSantis and having serious conversations with him about this, I think tells us potentially the future of Hegseth's nomination, and the fact that, DeSantis will be someone that is less polarizing amongst Republicans and will be someone that the Republican base would be happy to see in that position.
Let's watch some of what Florida Governor DeSantis has said about President-elect Trump in the past.
He said he was going to drain the swamp, and I appreciated that. He did not drain the swamp. It got worse. He also said that he was going to build a wall and have Mexico pay for it, which I supported, and that didn't happen.
Trump, his refusal to debate, to me, that's a slap in the face to the people of Iowa.
Donald Trump is a choice. He's focused on his issues and himself.
So, Tom, he said all that and more. Does it matter?
If this happens, it's a brilliant chess move, because it takes somebody who remains something of an independent powerhouse in Republican politics, not nearly where he was a year ago, but takes him out of the governorship, his own autonomy, puts him underneath of Trump, allows them to have some say in the governorship of Florida down there. I'm laughing because 1 year ago, when we were in the middle of the primary, we were still in the kiss of death countdown with DeSantis and Trump. They were sending out the emails constantly. Kiss of death, day 45.
Oh, I remember.
And that's pretty tepid from DeSantis. The question I have, and I was talking with some folks earlier about this, would he have the same problem that Matt Gaetz would have on the Hill? He didn't have great relationships with lawmakers. I mean, you remember he would walk around with his AirPods in. This was a key problem for him in the primaries. It's why he saw one of his best friends, Brian Mast, actually decamped from him. That was really remarkable. So I don't know that he would be able to survive a confirmation hearing. And the other question, too, is would he take it? Would he want to do that?
And Sabrina, just in the final minute here, what's in your notebook? What are you watching elsewhere in Washington this week?
I mean, I think that's definitely comes down to these confirmations and really us paying attention to who are the folks that Trump is going to be tapping for these positions. As we head towards January 20th, I think it's a big question. What is he going to be trying to get done on day one? I think we have some indications just from the people that he's tapping for these positions, how much, trade and immigration will be a huge issue, but how those things are fleshed out. How is it that he's going to roll out some of his trade policy? How is it that he's going to carry out mass deportation? I think for us, just getting some indications between now and January 20th will be key, because he made so many day one promises. So what will actually get done on day one?
Sabrina Rodriguez down in West Palm Beach, keeping an eye on the transition. Appreciate your reporting. And Tom LoBianco, always great to see you here on set. Thank you very much for stopping by. President-elect Trump could end electric vehicle tax credits. We'll take a look at that possible move that has Trump ally Elon Musk talking about it publicly. You're streaming America Decides.
We're not going to have any jobs left in Michigan, no auto jobs left in Michigan. They're all going over to China and other places with this ridiculous EV mandate, electric vehicle mandate.
President-elect Donald Trump has signaled he wants to pull the plug on the $7,500 tax credit for buyers of electric vehicles. Albert Gore III joins us now. He's the executive director of the Zero Emission Transportation Association, or ZETA, or is it Zeta or Zeta?
Zeta.
Zeta. So this is a fascinating debate because it has not just to do with climate change and electric vehicles and trying to transform the economy on that front, but also about the upcoming fight over tax policy. You have the expiration of the Trump tax cuts, and so many stakeholders in Washington are wondering, what's the Trump administration, what are these Republicans in Congress going to do with the tax code? And what's your read as an advocate for more electric vehicles of what's going to happen now with the tax code?
Well, I think the goal of this incoming administration, as it's been stated, is to grow U.S. manufacturing, to convince companies to invest in the United States. And in our industry, that's been happening for a decade, but it's really accelerated over the last several years. So when you're looking at federal investments that grow the U.S. manufacturing sector, that create more economic opportunity for Americans and communities across the country, these policies have been really strong drivers of growth. I think the EV credit is viewed as a consumer credit, but really what it is a demand signal for investment in particularly the upstream supply chain for critical minerals and batteries. Our industry has done a lot of onshoring over the last decade. 3 out of 4 EVs sold in the U.S. last year were made in the United States. Yeah. And typically, EVs are at the top of the list of most American-made cars. So we want to continue that progress.
Let's look at what Elon Musk, who's the omnipresent Trump ally at Mar-a-Lago, had to say on his social media platform X. He wrote, quote, "Take away the subsidies. It will only help Tesla. Also remove subsidies from all industries." So you have a producer of electric cars saying they don't want subsidies. So is there a tension among those in the electric vehicle world about where to go here?
Well, just for context, I think he did also mention removing all subsidies from all sectors. But, you know, Tesla's been a really strong driver of growth in the U.S. economy over the last decade and has crowded in a lot of investment from companies like Panasonic, LG, often in partnership with legacy automakers. But also, a lot of those companies have made investments in lithium production and refining and battery component manufacturing. And much of that is a result of the demand signal within this tax credit. You have to make cars here in the United States. You have to make escalating percentages of battery components and source minerals from the United States or free trade agreement countries. So this is really about growing the U.S. manufacturing sector and securing the supply chain for critical minerals. I think these are goals that are going to find a lot of alignment with folks.
Let's talk about that alignment. So when you look at Congress, as someone who studies this issue, broadly speaking, where do you see the coalitions inside the Republican Party, inside the Democratic Party, maybe bipartisan? Who are the key players, or who are the key? Which are the key groups when it comes to EV?
Well, you know, of course, there's the overriding need to scrutinize spending to make sure that federal investments that are being made are being done with the best interest of the taxpayer, but also the best interest of the American people. So if those investments are making a difference in creating new economic opportunity, and that is happening in communities in the Battery Belt. So Battery Belt we think of as Michigan, Kentucky, Ohio, and Georgia, but also Tennessee, South Carolina. I mean, there are huge factories being built in those states.
You think labor's still with EV?
Well, I think that anytime you have a policy that is crowding in $182 billion of investment in manufacturing capacity, American workers are excited about that, but communities that have been, you know, basically the backbone of U.S. manufacturing, particularly in the automotive sector for decades, I think they see the value in federal investment in factories in their communities, and I think their representatives do too.
Albert Gore III, who's on top of this issue and involved in it. It's going to be something we're going to have you back as this issue heats up on Capitol Hill. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. The House might be red, a little bit narrow, but the margins are so tight. We'll have more on that 2024 House outlook and what's going to come up in 2025. Coming up next, you're streaming America Decides. CBS News has called the last race in the House of Representatives for the 2024 campaign. Republicans now will maintain their majority next year after winning a total of 220 seats in that campaign. However, with their 215 seats, Democrats scored a net gain from their last term. to create a narrow GOP majority in the lower chamber. This majority will become even more narrow once Representatives Mike Waltz and a few others like Elise Stefanik leave their post to serve in President-elect Trump's new administration. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz has also resigned his House seat, even though he has since withdrawn from consideration for the role of Attorney General. Hunter Woodall joins me now to further discuss the state of the great House of Representatives. Hunter, Speaker Johnson is going to have his hands full.
Absolutely. And when you look at this margin, like you said, it's more narrow even than it was in the previous Congress. And he had a lot of trouble dealing with the Republican caucus at conference that obviously was a little bit more, difficult than maybe Republicans have had in past years. You look at this now, especially with those, upcoming resignations, everybody can sort of be a Joe Manchin, if you will, in this GOP majority if they want to be, as they try and, work on policy in the first 100 days of Trump's administration.
It does raise the question among my sources, and I'm sure yours as well, will the House matter? If it's so narrow, does that mean President-elect Trump, once he becomes President Trump once again, will he use the executive branch, executive authority, to exert his power more than trying to get some kind of coalition together in the House?
And that's a great question, right? Because, so often we think of those first 100 days as really setting the tone for a new administration. But Donald Trump has shown he's happy to try and, upend the norms of what we've seen in the presidency. And obviously, success in Congress is a big measuring stick early on. If he feels like he can do things through the executive branch, that's obviously, he can do that. But Congress is still that traditional way of, you want those major policy wins, you want those lasting policy wins, that's how you get them.
So let's go over why the House is only being called now in terms of the final number. The Republican in the Central Valley of California, John Duarte, defeated. It was a very close race. What does the state of California and all of these close races in California tell you about the political map?
And that's the notable thing here. I mean, so many of these races in California took weeks and weeks to call. And obviously, we've known for a while now Republicans were going to, retain control of the House. But it just shows, so much in these blue states, there are still Republicans who are very competitive in these races. There was Congressman, obviously, David Valadao, Republican who won re-election despite, having voted to impeach Donald Trump after the January 6th Capitol attack. But what we saw, obviously, was these are difficult contests. Republicans really had to try and appeal in these blue states to maintain, and separate themselves from the top of the ticket, but also be successful and show they could work with Donald Trump if they won re-election.
You've covered Tom Emmer from Minnesota. You know Minnesota politics well. Who's he have to contend with now in a narrow House majority? Who are the key players? Is it Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Congresswoman from Georgia? Anybody else come to mind as somebody who could have a real force in shaping the direction of the House?
Well, in any GOP majority, I mean, we'd be looking at the House Freedom, Caucus usually. Those are the folks farther to the right that obviously tend to like to have their voices heard, especially in a narrow majority on budget matters, on financial matters, but also on social policy matters. But in a majority like this, it could also be those more centrist-minded members. Your Don Bacons, your Mike Lawlers, who won re-election despite difficult races, and really could have a massive influence if they wanted to try and exert their power in a way that their allies farther to the right have in previous years.
Hunter Woodall, thanks so much for stopping by here at America Decides. We appreciate it. And finally tonight, as President-elect Trump considers rolling back electric vehicle tax credits here in the United States, Pope Francis is rolling out an all-new electric vehicle. The Vatican revealed the Mercedes-Benz built Pope-mobile today. The new car is in line with the pontiff's preaching on environmental protection, and they say it will have zero carbon emissions. And the new wheels come just in time. The Vatican is set to become the first country in the world to have only electric cars by 2030. Pretty small country, pretty small city, and I know you can't bring any cars into the Sistine Chapel, that's for sure. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.